Hello, this is for National 6 Urban Geography pupils, and I'm going to deliver a series of 4 lessons that focus on the need for management of recent urban change in developed and developing world cities, the strategies we employ to manage those changes, and the impact of those strategies. So that is a total of 6 possible exam questions, but you need to bear in mind that each of those questions could be applied to both housing and transport, so this is a big unit and it deserves your attention in revision. We're going to start off with our developed world case study, which is Edinburgh, and I'm going to deal with the housing first, dealing with, as I've said, the need for change, the strategies for change and the effectiveness of those strategies, and then I'll deal with transport in the next lesson. So Edinburgh and its housing. What are the things that need to change? Well, Edinburgh has various aspects of its housing that needs change and needs development. It's good to start here with the city housing strategy. This recent document, as you can see at the bottom, aims to achieve 3 key things. Broken into a little bit more detail. Basically, in the strategies that we're going to identify in this lesson and the problems that we're going to identify, one of the key things we need to look at is that people need to have homes that they can afford to buy. That's one of the key problems. So Edinburgh's facing one key problem, and that is that people cannot afford to purchase the properties that are in Edinburgh. Take the time to read through the 5 bullet points there, but and take a couple of notes, because there's some really useful stuff in here. Just look at that last bullet point. The average house price in Edinburgh is 6 times the average gross annual earnings. And it's 42% higher than the Scottish average, making Edinburgh the least affordable city in Scotland to buy. I mean, that's a brilliant piece of case study information that you can include in any answer, which is about the need for housing to change in Edinburgh. The second half of this document refers to what we might call building standards, the quality of the buildings. And again, read through these for yourself, pause the video and look through them, take some notes, but one that I would draw your attention to right now is that nearly half of older people households, so pensioners, are found to be in fuel poverty, which means that they cannot afford to heat their own homes. That's not because they've not got enough money, that is probably because the building itself is not well enough built and insulated. So building quality is another thing that we need to consider as a thing that we need to change. Let's get into some specific examples. Just looking at the population for a starter, Edinburgh's population is clearly growing. 16.2% between 1998 and 2018 is well above the national average. Those people are going to need to be provided with houses. If you just look at the screen, you can see that some of our housing stock, this example is in Muir House, leaves a lot to be desired. It's run down, it's old, it's scruffy. The building quality often invites problems such as damp, which can lead to things like asthma. A key problem also is that where we have poor housing stock, the people who can afford to leave those areas do so. And that leaves behind an ever increasingly concentrated pool of people who cannot afford to leave. Perhaps they don't have the savings, perhaps they, through unemployment or illness, do not have the ready income to move house. Perhaps they're just pensioners, older or infirm. Nonetheless, you get a concentrating of these factors within these areas, which contributes to them becoming less desirable. As you can see here in this headline, the insufferable conditions in the Muir House Council flats, as reported in the article, This can affect the health and well-being of people living in houses. Edinburgh has a need for housing change, not just because some areas are less desirable because there is a concentration of poverty, but also because the buildings themselves affect our health and well-being. As you can see here, damp housing can cause asthma. Not only that, but Edinburgh has a need for housing change because as people abandon declining areas, the property value falls. This makes it very much less likely for anybody out there who's looking to buy a flat or a house to move into the area. So these areas start to become abandoned, and they feel abandoned and can feel neglected, and the people who are left behind in these areas, perhaps elderly, perhaps lower income families, can feel very socially isolated there, and there's a real need for change in that. Another area where we need to be cautious with our housing in Edinburgh is with tourism. If you own a flat in the city centre, it makes a lot more sense to rent it to a tourist for a couple of weeks in the summer who will pay 4 or even 5 times the going rate that a local person would be expected to pay. Of course, in doing this, what you're effectively doing is taking the flat off the market for anybody out there, a Scottish person, who wants to long-term let themselves a flat to live in. The company Airbnb is often referred to here, but really what you're doing is short-term lets. And these short-term lets, as you can see in the picture, there's lots of little key boxes on the door frame. Those are secure boxes which a tourist who has rented the flat would be given the code to the box, and that would have the keys in, and they can let themselves in. That takes that flat off the market, and more and more people, as you can see in the picture, everyone in this stair is doing this because it's more profitable. But unfortunately it means that local people cannot get housing when they need it. So there's a need for change there. Another area where there is a need for change is homelessness. Whilst Scotland does a lot to tackle homelessness, there is a crisis in Edinburgh with a lack of social housing stock available. This is housing stock that we can use to help vulnerable people off the streets. So there's a need for change there. I'm just going to pause and help you to focus on the way I'm phrasing things. I'm constantly referring to the fact that there is a need for change, and insofar as then I'm making my point. So you need to make sure you're doing that in your answer. You need to refer to that there is a need for change in the availability of social housing stock available to homeless people, or that there is a need for change in the availability of flats to local people because tourism is taking those flats away due to short-term holiday lets. Always focus on the question. Moving on. Not only is there a lack of available flats or houses, but there's also a lack of affordable flats and houses. You'll see elsewhere in this lesson that some 45% of people's income is spent on rental. That's paying rent for your flat in Edinburgh. It's really, really expensive. So accommodation needs to be not just there, but it also has to be affordable. And this is something that there is a real need for change for in the capital. A lot of Edinburgh's housing stock is quite old, more than a century old. Many of the tenement flats that you've seen and will see more pictures of are over 100 years old, and those require constant upkeep and maintenance. And whose responsibility that is, and where that responsibility stops with more serious upgrades or renovations, is a constant point of conflict. So this is an area where we need there to be some kind of solution because the buildings are old and they do need care and maintenance. As you can see here, an area where we need there to be a solution provided, where we need there to be some change, is that traffic vibration and just age cause costly repairs to happen to old buildings across Edinburgh, not just to houses and flats, but to buildings in general. And given that so much of the city is so old, that is an ongoing problem. So, let's look at the exam question. For a developed city that you've studied, that's Edinburgh, explain the need for change to its housing infrastructure. Now, I've not given you a mark here, but aim for like 7, 8, 9, 10 marks. And remember, you're focusing on the need for change. So, explaining the problems that Edinburgh has currently. Explaining the difficulties faced by people in either acquiring accommodation or in affording accommodation, or explain the difficulties that residents experience in their accommodation. So for these problems that we have identified, there are of course solutions, and you could be asked to comment on those solutions. You might be asked to explain how we go about tackling the changes needed in Edinburgh. Well, one of the key problems is that there just aren't enough houses. There's simply not enough housing stock. So clearly construction is a solution. You need to have good case studies with detail. So this one here I would recommend to you. The Riccarton village site. Riccarton is an area outside the west of Edinburgh. There's a plan to construct something called Red Hughes Village, which will initially deliver 1,300-ish residential units. However, if approved, this would go on to produce 6,000 homes in total. This kind of construction is really meaningful. There's a lot of homes being built. I should mention now that this isn't all good news. This area here you see in the map is greenbelt land, previously farmland, and so a lot of animal habitat is affected. A lot of natural space is lost. A lot of the local people living in places like Curry, which is a very attractive, desirable village outside the city, will feel that the village feel of where they live will be eroded and ultimately lost if places like Red Hughes continue to be constructed. And so there are problems there. Expanding on that theme, here is an example of a expansion of housing called Broom Hills, which was actually stopped by local residents. This plot of land was going to be built on for around about, I think, 120 houses. I can't remember exactly. And the local people felt that it would congest this local road too much, causing a danger, and that it was of concern and anger about decreasing green space, and that this might affect wildlife. Now, this is an example of how effective this solution might be. It's worth mentioning now that you may not just get asked about how to solve the changes we need to tackle in the city centre, but you may need to comment on how effective those solutions are. So this is a really good example of how simply building more homes isn't always effective because local people might disagree with the construction. On to solution 2. Not only do we need to build more homes, but we need to make the houses that we have more affordable. Affordable housing is housing that is specially designated in its construction towards first-time buyers, or that is given or that a certain proportion of the flats built are given over to something called social rent, which is when basically you rent a council house. Now, the Scottish Government has committed, and so has Edinburgh Council committed, towards the construction of more affordable housing. And as you can see in the picture, there's been some great successes in doing this. However, whilst this makes it more affordable for first-time buyers. That's somebody who is buying their first property. There is a funding black hole. What that means is that the council have got about a 80 million, 77 million pound funding gap at the present time, and that they're not sure where that money is going to come from. So there's a funding problem. So if you're talking about the effectiveness of providing affordable housing, you have a comment there you can make, but you would need to know the facts and the figures. Another good point about the effectiveness of this is to underscore the fact that 70% of the homes are for social rent, and the remainder would be for low-cost home ownership. This is really good because it's providing lower income families with a rentable, affordable option, but also it's providing affordable purchase options for those people who want to own their own home, because it is, in the end, more economical to own your own home. You'll pay less buying a house in the long run than you will paying rent. So that's solution 2. Solution 3. We've talked about providing more houses, more flats, and also providing more affordable houses and flats, and those are two different things. But there's also marks to be gained talking about how we can regenerate old industrial areas, known as brownfield sites, to do that. This is Fountain Bridge in Edinburgh. You may have been. This is the Cineworld cinema complex here, which has got big cinema and bowling and so on in it. And highlighted in colour is a huge area of development, which used to be a series of breweries. Edinburgh's famous brewing district. Now, those breweries have long since gone into decline and been knocked down, hence the term brownfield. And they've used these brownfield sites as, generally speaking, quite a cheap acquisition of land. It's not very good quality land, so it tends to be going a bit cheaper. And they've built affordable flats, student accommodation, and also houses and flats to buy on the site. In so doing, they've made sure this is a really effective solution because it encourages a nice mix of people to come to an area. That means the house prices don't rise too quickly. It means that local people are still part of the community of the area. They're not forced to leave by the house price going up too sharply. And you'll also notice this, that they've included the construction of businesses and office spaces, making sure that this isn't just an endless area of anonymous flats, but that there are people going to work, there are people here during the daytime, that this is very much a community space. So there's lots of reasons why this is quite an effective solution. You're taking an old, broken, dirty and dangerous part of the city and regenerating it through housing, affordable housing, and student flats, and incorporating into that offices and shops and regenerating a whole area. Solution 4 is related to this, to what I've just been speaking about, which is redevelopment. Now, redevelopment is when you destroy a whole area and then rebuild it, and sometimes that is necessary. On the right hand side you can see these flats here are in Sight Hill, or they were in Sight Hill. There were the low rises and there were the high rises, and the area had fallen into disrepair. There were multiple indicators of social deprivation in Sight Hill, though it's not helpful to dwell on those too long. The buildings themselves were not fit for purpose. That's the key point that we're making here. And they, as a result, as I've mentioned before, people who could afford to leave did leave the area. Very few people wanted to move into the area, and that then resulted in a concentrating effect of people who were too impoverished to move, of people who were perhaps unable to work through illness or disability, through pensioners, all being concentrated into this area. And yes, there were social problems too. So those three vulnerable groups would find themselves concentrated next to those people who might be involved in substance abuse and crime associated with that. So you can see that there were numerous social problems that can grow out of poor urban design. So this is a problem that we need a solution to, and that solution is redevelopment. These flats that you see in the pictures on the right have now been destroyed, and they've been replaced by the North Sighthill Regeneration Project. 316 homes being built, and I think there's more to come. And there's loads you can say about how this is a really effective solution. It's effective because, as you can see this lady saying here, she's going to have more bathrooms for her family. She'll have a private garden, which must make a huge difference if you're used to living in a tower block. The difference to your health and well-being must be huge. So there's a really important point. Sticking with the North Sighthill project, though, there are loads more things to say. The construction company Keep Moat Homes was given the contract for the construction. And you'll see in the writing here, do pause the video and read the screens, guys, making sure you're taking notes as you go, that there's a balance of affordable homes for social rent and 88 homes for mid-market rent and a further 132 directed for sale. We've seen that before. So there's a balance of flats that were for sale and ones that were affordable and for rent, I'm sorry. But the point that I was going to focus on there was Keep Moat Homes. Now, Keep Moat Homes is a company. As part of the contract, they had to, and they did, provide access to certified training for new entrants and candidates facing traditional and historical barriers to employment via an ambitious community engagement plan. That's super important. This is a really effective plan because not only is the company building houses to buy and houses to rent and making sure that they're affordable, but also they're providing training, apprenticeship programs for local people who previously living in Sighthill, they may have had no other way of making a living. And that's what it means by traditional and historical barriers to employment, and getting those people with better skills and better chances of employment. It's underlining the importance that we're not just building buildings here, we're building a community. And as soon as you see the distinction and the difference and the importance of that difference, the sooner you'll get better at town planning. And it's one of the key things we need to understand about town and city planning, is these urban spaces we're constructing are not just simply bricks with a roof on top. They have to provide an environment for the local people as well. So that's a really good example of how that's been an effective solution. It's probably a good time to mention it because it kind of fits in everywhere, that the Scottish Government has also helped to make houses affordable with their Help to Buy scheme, which will allow first-time buyers, people buying their first property, a 15% reduction in the purchase price if it is an affordable new build flat or house. So if it is designated as an affordable home. And that's a nice straightforward case study that you can take away right there. Solution 5 is a nice straightforward one. Basically, the Scottish Government in conjunction with councils has empowered councils to have to put rules in place controlling the number of short-term lets and the rules surrounding short-term lets, and making it more difficult for people to just rent out their property for 6 weeks to a tourist for 5 times the normal price and then denying the local Scottish people the availability of that flat for themselves. That's a really good case study right there, how we've tackled that. So, in the following table, as with other lessons of mine, you'll see that I've broken down the 3 exam questions. We have the need for change, what change is needed, the solution that we can provide to that change, and the effectiveness of the solution. So I'll go through these relatively quickly. I won't read every single word. You should pause the screen, you should take the notes, and it's worth pointing out that they actually form a model answer as you go. So here is the stated need, here's the stated solution, and here's the effectiveness of that solution. There is a lack of housing stock. That's a clear problem in Edinburgh. One of the solutions is that £2.5 billion is being invested in affordable housing. The effectiveness of this is it increases the availability and it brings house prices down. So I've started off with a fairly easy short mark just to explain how this works. And if you were asked for solutions, you could include just this detail here. If you were asked for the effectiveness of those solutions, you should extend into including this detail here. If you were asked for just the need for change, then you're just looking for column 1. Before we go on, I should just make clear, as I always do, you need to include case study evidence. You have to. Otherwise your answer will feel very thin and very weak, and it won't get good credit. So if we were just to focus on the need for change, you could not simply copy out the words that we have in the need for change boxes. You would need to back them up with some of the facts and figures that I've gone through in this lesson. Okay, let's crack on. So the next big need for change is antisocial problems that escalate as wealthier people abandon poorer housing stock. I used the example of Muirhouse earlier. Regenerating areas such as tenement housing in Gorgie and in Leith brings yuppies back into the area. Yuppies are young urban professionals, I'm sure you've heard that in your lessons. And those people spend money in the area. Their money trickles out through the neighbourhood and it supports local businesses and the community. Another thing we can do is to kind of deal with antisocial problems is to make areas more attractive and safer. This can be done by cleaning of canal towpaths, making them well lit, putting CCTV cameras in place, regenerating play parks, all to make the area more safe, more attractive, so that families will use it. It's effective because families are then attracted to live and spend time in areas, and as soon as you do that, you have a kind of community feel. And commuters and families use the cleaned up towpaths, and this is effective because this reduces the crime rate. If public spaces are spaces that are used and populated by people, it tends to have an effect on the level of crime that we see. Another big area for change, as I've covered, is that the population of Edinburgh is growing. We need more houses. So the solution is more house construction, e.g. the 6,000 homes that are intended on being built at the Red Hughes village in West Edinburgh. Effectiveness of this? Well, it's built on greenbelt land, so it's not a very popular option. And villages like Curry, like I mentioned, they feel that they're going to get swallowed up and they're going to lose their identity. There's a lack of affordable homes for poorer people. The city housing strategy aims to build 20,000 new homes. That's the first picture that I showed you, by the way, in the whole lesson. However, there is a £77 million funding black hole that threatens this project, so progress has been slow. However, as we saw in the new Sight Hill housing project, the North Sight Hill project, a regeneration project, the families that have moved report larger houses, better play spaces and no damp conditions, so it has been effective. As I was mentioning, North Sight Hill regeneration project has redeveloped an entire area of stagnant housing. It comes with a community engagement plan, remember, that helps locals into training. It aims to improve the public spaces, which we've just mentioned, and those houses will of course be very well insulated to avoid fuel poverty. The poor condition of properties is another need for change. For example, flats in Muirhouse, flats in Sight Hill. The redevelopment, that means the destruction and rebuilding of tower blocks is of course a really good solution. You have your example of Sight Hill. Your teacher will probably talk to you about a loss of social fabric. What this means is when you destroy the buildings, we lose that sense of community sometimes. And it's only effective, as we saw in Fountain Bridge, if you're not just building houses, but you're also building offices and shops and the infrastructure that you need, like post offices and a bank, and bus services. All of these things need to be built alongside the houses in order for you to actually have a community rather than just a bunch of houses with nothing else. The next big area of change is that the cost of property in Edinburgh is too high. Some areas it's at 45% of your income. The Help to Buy scheme is a great piece of case study knowledge as a solution, and it's effective at helping young people onto the property ladder. Some areas like Gorgie and Leith have got so well regenerated that they've become really quite fashionable, and this leads to runaway house prices. The solution to this is to make sure, like at Fountain Bridge, which is just next to Gorgie, that any new houses that are built have to have affordable homes. So if you're going to build a new block of flats, at least a certain percentage of them have to be affordable homes. And that means that lower income people, poorer people or first time buyers are still able to purchase properties within these areas. Some areas are run down and dangerous, like in Fountain Bridge. Demolition and redevelopment of these inner city spaces with affordable housing is the solution, and you'd need to talk about why that's so effective. So far this has been really quite effective, so far so good, you can see I've said there. But the property prices in these areas do rise even though there are affordable properties built. Then undeniably the area is much more attractive now that the local parks have been put back into place and that things like the canal towpaths have been cleaned and made safe. Okay, I have gone through a great deal of information there in a very short time frame. You need to re-watch this lesson several times, I would suggest. You need to pause the video to take notes. You need to make sure that you're referring to your own class notes, because it's all very well knowing the names of the case studies, but really you need to know where they are in order for them to make any kind of sense in your head. Do not underestimate the difficulty of this unit of work. Make sure that you do not just make this a video you watch once. Make it an embedded part of your revision. If you find me annoying, switch the sound off and just watch the pictures, pausing to take down the notes from the writing. But I can assure you that it is the case study detail that will make or break the quality of your answer being an A or not being an A band piece of work. Okay, so that's us finished, and that's Edinburgh housing done. The next lesson I'll do is Edinburgh transport, and you can see that episode at your leisure. So just to conclude, in this lesson I have covered the need for change in Edinburgh, the strategies that we've put in place to help with that need, and the effectiveness of those strategies. Okay, thanks for listening.